I hate the fall for one specific reason. It's when the majority of my allergies are all active at the same time. It makes life very fun. So we are in week 2 of a new series that we began last week about being human. What does it mean to be human, to be made in the image of God? And actually, how does what Jesus says about our humanity directly confront some of the difficulties, challenges, and lies that are being presented to us through the kind of cultural lens of everything that's being advanced with the introduction of AI technology? Okay? So it's going to be a fun series. If you're just joining us today for the child dedication and you're like, wow, what did I miss last week? You should go check it out. But really quickly, to sum up a little bit about what we talked about last week, right? We are, as the people of Jesus, living in a place of spiritual conflict. Like we actually living the way of Jesus, upholding the kingship of Jesus into our world puts us in conflict with the spiritual powers and principalities, the forces of evil who seek to uphold the values of the enemy, right? So we are actually in a battle between the way of Jesus and the way of the powers, right? And the way of Jesus says promises life to its fullest. Life that is truly life in relationship with God. Whereas Jesus warns us, this is in John 10:10, that the thief, the enemy, he actually comes to steal, kill, and destroy. His goal is to bring the opposite of good, full life. And he uses all sorts of means to do so, right? And so last week we looked at a little bit about how the way of Jesus and the way of the powers, there's conflict there. And as the people of Jesus, we actually have to be able to proclaim the truth of Jesus even when it confronts powers and principalities that are at work in the world. And those are spiritual forces of evil, but those are also cultural powers and sort of cultural idols, things that grab a hold of our attention. And we looked at how AI is actually, it's essentially an idol utilized by the powers. And over the next few weeks, we're going to look at all of the different ways that the uncritical adoption, and that's the key word, is uncritical adoption of AI technology is leading us into further and further deception and actually really damaging to our spiritual formation, right? So we said that what we actually have to do about this is we have to be a prophetic voice into the culture. We need to proclaim the truth of Jesus and what Jesus says about who we are as humans and what it means to live a truly human life, what it means to live as people who are actually being formed in a certain way. Because if we do not uphold the truth of Christ, if we do not place into effect boundaries and rules and regulations in our own life and the lives of our children, we will be formed by the forces of evil. We will be formed by the culture around us. And we will not be formed in the image of Jesus then, but in the image of something or anything else, right? But the way we do this is not just by saying, well, look, here's a problem, here's a problem, here's a problem, and warning everyone, because anyone can do that, and people are. People who do not know Jesus are sounding alarm bells about some of the danger inherent with the uncritical adoption of AI technology, right? It doesn't take a follower of Christ to warn about these dangers. What we have that no one else does is the ability to uphold an alternative vision, right? So we must hold up a more beautiful vision of life. The life that is truly life, the life that Jesus offers, which is embodied humanity, humanity in connection with one another, humanity that is submitted to God and unafraid to be different from those around us, right? So that is what we're doing over the course of this series, is looking at what does the Bible say about being human? And what does that actually do to uphold a better vision for life that we can offer into a culture that is looking for meaning and looking for answers and looking to make life better, but not looking in the way of Jesus and actually opening themselves up to more harm, right? So that's where we're going to go today. And I want to say that, I think all of this stems from one simple verse. being human, what it means to be human, we find right near the beginning of the Bible in Genesis 1. Right? And everything we're looking at about humanity sort of is just an unpackaging of this creation of man. Right? So in Genesis chapter 1, God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth." So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. We are made in God's image. Right? And last week we looked at how that actually means that we have authority and we have responsibility. That's why it's not up to us to just say, okay, well, I'm not going to worry about this stuff. I'm going to kind of withdraw and pull away. I'm not going to utilize this. I'm not going to engage in that. But everyone else can just do whatever they want. We actually have a responsibility to represent God into the creation. And that means advocating for what is good for humans and for this creation that God has called us to steward. Right? And that's why we have to actually speak up when something is doing detrimental harm to people, right? But it also means we have it also means that we are like God in some way, right? Being made in God's image does in fact mean we are like God in certain ways. He made us to be like him. Last week we said part of that is we're creative. We're going to look at some other similarities between us and God in the coming weeks. But right now I need to caveat this by saying humans are like God, but we are not God. And that should go without saying, but I have to repeat it because this is actually one of the oldest lies that humanity falls for, is that if we're like God, it means that I am basically God and I can have the rights and power of God in my life. And then we extend that further into the lives of others, right? It's the classic temptation. But we need to hear very clearly, God makes us in his likeness, but he doesn't make us him. So humans are like God, but we are not God. But it's one of the classic temptations. It's one of the classic ways that the enemy will try to pull us in, is by convincing us that we can be more like God if we disobey God's limitations and embrace a power of our own, right? So last week, I talked about how AI does present a new kind of challenge that we have to navigate, right? It is something that is inherently different than all of the broken tools that we've made for good and the powers have turned to evil in the past. Because that's the history of basically every good thing people make, is we make a tool for the glory of God and the good of others, and then sin within us, and the voice of the enemy poisons that tool and turns it into an idol that pulls us astray and causes harm and is used to move us further and further away from God and further into our own sin and brokenness. And AI presents a whole new level and layer of that is causing things to happen rapidly. But today, I also want to point out that AI actually doesn't change anything because it doesn't make sin or temptation new. It's the exact same stuff. It's just happening on a different scale, at a different pace, a different speed, but it doesn't change anything. It's actually just the latest echo of the exact same ancient temptation to transgress the limits that God has placed upon us. Right? It is the latest echo of the voice of Satan in the garden. Right? So I want us to look at Genesis chapter 3, starting at verse 2. So some context, if you're not super familiar with the creation story, God makes man, and then he places them in the garden. There's this perfection, this goodness, this beauty. And then says, you're going to go and you're going to rule over all of creation, and you're going to take the goodness of God that is present in Eden and bring it everywhere. And you can have anything and everything in this garden. It is for you, except for this one tree. This one tree is off limits. So anyone who has raised a child knows what happens when you put something as out of bounds, right? Well, it starts right here in the garden. So the woman said to the serpent, well, we may eat the fruit from the trees in the garden, but about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, you must not eat it or touch it, or you will die. No, you will not certainly die. the serpent said to the woman. In fact, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The woman saw that the tree was good for food and delightful to look at, and that it was desirable for obtaining wisdom. So she took some of its fruit and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Right, the first lie of the enemy is to say, no. The limitation that God has placed on you, it's not to help you, it's to harm you. If you want to be like God, disobey. If you want to be like God, push past the limits he's given you and take it for yourself. Yet we were as close to like God as we could ever be when he made us in his image, before sin affected us. But we just had to listen to the voice of the liar and push past our limitations, right? And we do this over and over again, right? We forget that being made in the image of God does in fact mean that we're not God. We are like him, but we're not him. We are limited beings. And that is a gift from God, right? We hear the limitations of God and often think it's keeping us from something. I want to push past the limits God has placed on me so that I can become more. But the reality is the limits that God has given us are for our good. That it is a gift from him. When God says, no, you're not designed for this, as our designer, he knows. And as the one who loves us, he is saying what is good for us. And yet we're always tempted to push past those limitations, right? And I think there are three big essential differences between God and us, right? Over the coming weeks, we're going to look at some of the ways in which we are very similar to God through being made in his image. So I want to get right out of the way first, three of the biggest differences. And the first is that God is omnipotent, which is just a fancy way of saying God is all-powerful. There is literally no limit to God's strength and power and what he can do, right? He is the uncreated creator. He can do all things. Do you know what we can't do? All things. We can do all things through Christ who gives us strength because it's the power of God at work in us, but it's his power that enables us to do what is impossible for us. It's not our own. Yet we will often try and push past the limits of our strength because we fail to recognize that our strength is limited, and that is by design. If God wanted us to be all-powerful, he would have made us so. He could have done that, but he didn't. And he didn't because he loves us. So he has placed limits on us. And today we're going to look at how we are constantly giving into the temptation to ignore the limits of our strength, right? But another big difference is that God is omnipresent. God can be everywhere all at once. This breaks the mind to think about, but God is just as present on the other side of the world where they are worshiping him as he is right here, right now with us. But he's also just as present in the past and the future. It's mind-boggling to think about, but we can't do that at all. But it doesn't stop us from trying. Now, does it? Hands up if you have a smartphone. Hands up if you have used your smartphone even once to have a conversation with someone else while you were at the table or sitting with someone face-to-face present, but you reached out to someone else. Yeah, you're trying to be present in multiple places. Do you know what happened in that moment? You weren't present to either of them. Happens to me all the time when someone's trying to have a text conversation with me and then someone's trying to talk to me face to face, I don't pay attention to what anyone's saying. My brain just goes like hamster spinning its wheel because I can't be in two places at once. And that's just a cheap imitation at it. And yet we're constantly trying to do that. We're trying to make ourselves so hyper aware of everything that's happening everywhere all at once that we don't allow ourselves to be fully present anywhere. And we're going to talk more about that next week when we get into looking at relationships, right? But God is omnipresent. We're not. Our presence is limited, and that's by design. God doesn't want us to try and be in two places at once. He wants us to be in one place at one time. And if he needs you somewhere else, I think he'll just teleport you like he did in the book of Acts, right? God can do anything. We are limited. Embrace our limitations. Okay? And here's the next one, and this is one that I think we are so particularly guilty of in the West. So we're actually going to look at this in more depth in 2 weeks. But God is omniscient. He knows everything. There is literally nothing God does not know. And we pursue that so hard. And we always have. But it's only gotten more intense that we desire to just know everything about everything, to have every answer readily available at any point in time was the desire of the occult and of magic all through history. And now it's the offering of every tech company to every person who wants to be omniscient. But here's the thing, God knows everything, and he made us so that our knowledge is limited. We can't know everything. We can't have unlimited wisdom and knowledge. We're not designed for it. We're actually designed to require the wisdom and knowledge of God, right? And that's one of the most beautiful things about the limits that God places on us by nature of our design, is that they're made to help us embrace him and recognize we need him for all things. Because God is without limitation, but we are highly limited. And that's actually built right into our design as humans. Right, so we often talk about like, well, what are we as humans, you know? And you can get super nerdy and philosophical and be like, okay, well, are we tripart beings? Do we have like a mind and a soul and a body? Are they distinct from one another? Are we a mind in a body? Are we a soul in a body? Are we a body who has these things? All of that is actually just wrong. God made us intentionally with spiritual reality, with a spiritual life, an ability to know spiritually, to have a mind and an intellect that can think and feel, but to have it all so intertwined into a body that we are indistinguishable from all of them. So that when Christ became human, he did it by taking on not just a human mind, not just a human soul, but a human body. He became enfleshed as one of us. And when we are raised from the dead to spend eternity with God, it will not be as disembodied minds or disembodied souls, but our eternity will be physical. When God makes all things new, sin does not get the earth. God removes sin, removes evil, judges it all, and makes all things new so that heaven and earth come together as one. We are intentionally embodied beings. Our mind and our soul bound to our flesh, our limited flesh. Do you understand this? God could have made us unlimited to a sense, right? The spiritual beings that God made, the angels and the spiritual forces of evil, they don't have the same limits as us. They don't have a body to get tired. They don't have a body that has physical limitations. He made them purely spiritual beings. And he could have done the same for us. He could have said, you know what? My image bearers, the ones who are going to represent me to creation, I don't want them to tire. I want them to be ceaseless in their labor. I'm going to remove the limitations of a body that grows weary. But he didn't. God designed us as embodied, integrated creatures, which means we have to embrace the limitations. Because do you know what happens if we don't? Our body will do it for us. And it won't be nearly as life-giving, right? Anyone who's worked themselves to the point of burnout knows what that's like. Because here is the reality. One of the biggest limitations that we try and transgress over and over again in our culture is our need for rest. And actually, something that's disturbed me is if you go back 50, 60, 70 years, when they were talking about, one day in the future, in the far future, we're gonna be flying cars like in the Jetsons, and we're gonna have robots who do everything that we don't want to, so that we can do the important work of creating and have more freedom to be present with the people we love and do good things. And do you know what we're doing instead? We're saying, okay, how can I utilize these robots and this artificial intelligence to make it so that I can do more work and stay busier and get more done and be more overproductive? Because we actually have a big idol that is productivity. And we utilize anything and everything we can to make ourselves more productive. Because we've bought into this really bizarre lie that we are made to be ceaselessly productive. We're not. God designed you to require rest. And if you don't take it, your body will force you to. There is a switch that prevents you from going too far overboard. And some of you in this room have hit it, and you know what I'm talking about, right? So how many of you in this room have heard of Sabbath? Hands up. Hands up if you've heard the word Sabbath. Okay. Now, hands up if when you hear Sabbath, what comes to your mind is super religious, lots of rules, I don't like this. And your legalism siren is going off. If that's you, put your hand up. This is a safe place. I see some people. Yeah. There are certain traditions where Sabbath is enforced the same way that we see it enforced by the Pharisees in the Gospels, where it's a rule. It's about limiting you beyond what God desires to say, you have to do this, you have to follow this, here's a list of rules. And so when we hear Sabbath, we think, no, grace, not law. That's not me. I'm free under Christ, so I can work till I die. And if we're honest, that's a little bit more satirical than we might say it to ourselves, but that's the posture we have sometimes. Actually, I'm laughing because anyone who was in the finance course with me heard that that's my retirement plan. I kid. I'm hoping that I'll have a better one, but I struggle with this so bad. I feel the need to just keep going and laboring. God had to teach me years ago the importance of Sabbath, of rest, because here's the reality. Jesus pushed back against all the laws that Pharisees added. He pushed back against trying to make it a burden that is placed on people, but Jesus was very pro-Sabbath. Listen to this in Mark chapter 2. Jesus told them, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Do you understand that? God didn't design the Sabbath and say, okay, people, keep this rule. The Sabbath rest is really important to me. He said, okay, people, you need to rest. So I'm going to give you a day and say, just stop. Because the logic for the Sabbath, recognize this, is that God stopped on the seventh day, so we must as well. But if God is all powerful and does not need to rest, as scripture actually makes clear to us, God does not get tired like we get tired. God didn't need to rest. Why did he? So that he could set a pattern for us to say, look, you need to do this. You need to stop. You need to cease. Right? So our rest, our need and ability to rest is a gift from God. And we shouldn't ignore it. In fact, when we do ignore it, it's at our own peril. Right? It's one of those limits that we love to try and push past. But here's the thing about rest. Okay, it's not just that we are not meant to work without ceasing, and we must know to stop. That's an important part of Sabbath. We first have to recognize, okay, I need to stop. I can't just work myself to death. I need to intentionally pause from my labor. That's step one. But the other thing is that we need to know how to rest. Okay, and so much of that actually stems from our mindset, right? Because even if you stop working for a day, but your mind is still set that what matters to God is your productivity, you're going to stay trapped in this loop of guilt and shame whenever you cease. And I talk to a lot of, not to be gendered, but I talk to a lot of guys who, when they try to take rest, feel this guilt and shame because what they've been told from culture is that you need to just work without ceasing. That's a lie from the enemy. Understand this, that you are more than your productivity. Last week, we looked at how God values us because we are made in his image. We are his beloved. He desires relationship with us. And the powers and principalities desire us for what they can gain. And we don't want to be known and take our cues and our identity from something that looks at us as a product, like culture does. Remember, social media, it's free because you're the product. And yet that's where we turn so often to look at what is the meaning of life? What should I do? Even where we go for rest, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But instead we need to hear from God who says, no, it's not about your productivity. It's not about what you do. It's about who you are, that you are mine. You are my beloved. That's how God looks at us, right? So we're not our productivity. And actually understand that God values things apart from their usefulness. The New Testament is so clear on this, that the most valuable things to God are the ones that in the world's eyes are the least useful, right? And yet so often we think, okay, God, I want to be really valuable to you, so I'm going to work harder and harder and harder. I'm going to work harder in my place of employment, and I'm going to work harder in the church, and I'm going to work harder in my neighborhood, and I'm going to work harder in my family, and just keep going and going and going and going and never stop. Even if we cease, we don't actually stop because we're still bought into this lie that it's our productivity and our usefulness that matters. It's not, right? And that's why one of the most, and I alluded to this, one of the most damaging things that I think that the uncritical embrace of generative AI is doing is when it was dreamed up years ago, we thought this is going to free us up to do more of the human work of creating. I personally know a ton of artists who were making a career as artists who no longer get jobs because anyone can do it with AI. It's so easy. It's so easy. And I think realistically, and I'm gonna say this, I'm never gonna come down throughout this series if you're looking for like a clear, just condemn AI outright or say we should just embrace it, it's the way of the future. You're not gonna get either of those. I'm gonna do the really boring, annoying thing and say, take it back to the wisdom of God and the scriptures and bring it to prayer and wrestle through and use discernment. There might be a time and a place where what you need is not a masterwork of art. You need a quick thing in 5 seconds to slap on as a cover photo that no one's gonna look at. Okay. But what about creating movies? What about creating murals for churches? What about creating things meant to serve a human purpose of glorifying God and connecting people? That's what art is for. Our art is good. God loves art. He designed art. If you listen, the scriptures are so clear that God put beauty in the world, not just function. Beauty for the sake of beauty, because God is an artist. And I think we need to pause on how much creative work we let an artificial bot do. Because I don't think we can outsource creativity and expect to stay human. And you know it. If you've ever read an AI written book, and those exist, if you haven't read one, save yourself the trouble, it's not worth it. It's worse than reading, like, I was gonna diss a series, but I think there's enough millennials in here that might still enjoy it, but I'm gonna do it anyways. It's like worse than reading Twilight. And if there's any Twilight fans, you can come at me later, but I'm pretty sure the works of the great J.R.R. Tolkien can outpace anything, so I'm safe. But AI writing, it's garbage. There's no humanity to it. There's no soul. AI art, it's garbage. There's no humanity to it. There's no soul. AI actors, that's an actual thing. So like Sean Astin, the current president of the SAG-AFTRA, it's a big actors union, they're trying to advocate for legislation to be put in that you can't just create an AI actress, because it's actually just copying a whole bunch of other actors who put heart and soul into it, and then it's putting something out that is not human. It can't create, it can't use that God, image of Godness to do real creativity. Because that's the beauty of art, is that the image of God in us allows us to create something that actually points us back to him. I'm gonna read a quote from one of my favorite theologians, N.T. Wright. The point is this: The arts are not the pretty but irrelevant bits around the border of reality. They are the highways into the center of a reality which cannot be glimpsed, let alone grasped any other way. The present world is good, but broken, and in any case incomplete. Art of all kinds enables us to understand that paradox in its many dimensions. But the present world is also designed for something which has not yet happened. It is like a violin waiting to be played, beautiful to look at, graceful to hold, and yet if you'd never heard one in the hands of a musician, you wouldn't believe the new dimensions of beauty yet to be revealed. Perhaps art can show something of that, can glimpse the future possibilities pregnant within the present time. Do you know what can't do that? Artificial creativity. Only image bearers of God, in love with him, wrestling with reality, can create for creativity's sake, right? So we need to resist the lie that productivity is all that matters, that usefulness is all that matters. So if you're even remotely creative, create. If you struggle to stop working, take a rest, but replace it with something life-giving that actually reminds you and reinforces to you that you are more than what you do. You are more than your productivity. You are a beloved image bearer of God who is made to require real rest, right? And that's the thing, is it has to be real rest, right? They're good. They're smart. We need to be smarter. Praise God, we have the Spirit of Christ dwelling in us, the mind of Christ dwelling in us, who can empower us to say, no, you know what? I'm going to take a real rest. I'm going to go out into nature and be reminded of the goodness of God. I'm going to spend time delighting in the gifts of God by being with family and friends. I'm going to create, not to produce something of value, but just to create for creativity's sake. I'm going to unplug and be with God. That's real rest, and we need it. So I think a question we have to ask, especially as we're surrounded by more and more intelligent technology that is trying actively to suck you in and addict you, is how can we place Sabbath boundaries around our use of technology? How can we create pockets of real rest, unplugged, disconnected from everything out there to connect to God and one another instead, right? But there is a flip side to this. Sometimes we are so happy to embrace the need for rest that we forget that Sabbath is one day. That God made us to work 6 and Sabbath 1. And this is the other side of the coin. How many of you have seen ads basically telling you that if you just buy this set of AI employees, which is nonsense to me, they're not AI employees, it's programming. If you buy these AI employees, you'll never have to work. You can sleep all day while you're getting paid because your boss has no clue. There's so many problems with that. Starting with honesty. But it's selling a lie that your life will be better if you don't work at all, if you don't do anything. And here's the thing. Retirement is good as long as you retire. So Peter said, I keep plugging the finance course. We're going to have to do it again soon. But Peter said at the last week of the finance course, don't retire from something, retire to something. What are you going to do? What life are you going to live? What are you going to do that is meaningful and life-giving? Because you need that. We're made for that. We're made to require purpose. And our purpose can't just be sitting around watching Netflix. There's not enough on Netflix to give your life meaning. There really isn't. So we actually have to resist the temptation to just buy into the lie that life will be better if we do nothing, ever. Because that is a lie. We're made to work 6 and rest 1, right? And it's said all over the scriptures. It's even in the New Testament. I think sometimes people say, yeah, that Old Testament, I can think of all these verses, but in the New Testament, no, we're under grace, so we don't have to work as hard. It's fine. No, Paul says, everything you do, labor as if for the Lord. Whatever your work, as long as it is not anti-Christ. And there's very little work that I've encountered where someone said, I don't know, my job, does it really honor God? I'm like, what do you do? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, no, that does. Go and work as if for the Lord. Maybe if you're, I was going to say a hitman, but I don't think I can say that because this is on YouTube. But there are very, very small category of jobs that are anti-Christ. In everything else, work as if for the Lord. Glorify him. Serve him in all that you do, because we're made to do good around us. Paul even says in 2 Thessalonians, look, in fact, when we were with you, this is what we commanded you. If anyone isn't willing to work, he should not eat. For we hear that there are some among you who are idle. They are not busy, but busy bodies. Now we command and exhort such people by the Lord Jesus Christ to work quietly and provide for themselves. But as for you, brothers and sisters, do not grow weary in doing good. You're made to work. Not to work ceaselessly, not to work unending, not to work as if productivity is all that matters, but you are made to work. God designed you that way. Right? In fact, some of the most depressed people I know are the ones who have gone for years and years without doing anything of much meaning. That was actually the most depressed period of my life, was probably when I lost a job I loved for no reason. I was like, what do I do? And I struggled, because we're designed to work hard, right? We are made for hard work. We're not made to work without ceasing, but we are made to work hard for 6 and rest well for 1, and then repeat, right? And I say this not to say it all has to be your paid labor. Like, even when you retire, the happiest people I know in retirement are the ones who still work, whether it's volunteering for the church, getting involved in the lives of their grandkids or great-grandkids, helping their community in some way. The most miserable retired people I know are the ones who said, I'm done working, I'm gonna do nothing, I'm gonna watch disappointing baseball games. Guys, I looked at the score yesterday. I don't know what's happening to me, but enough of you are excited about the whole Jays making it to the big baseball tournament thingy that I cared enough to check and went, wow, I better check on the sports ball people, because they're gonna be a little sad. Sorry, that was a total diversion. But the people, all they live for is what is on TV. Let me do my next puzzle. Are the most miserable retired people I know. And then the retired people where I'm like, can I have your level of energy, are the ones who don't stop. They keep serving, and they're involved in ministries at their church and in other places, because we're made to do good, hard work, right? And we as humans are designed to do good, hard work, specifically that impacts in our community. God made us to make a difference in the world around us. That's part of being made in the image of God. That's why God enfleshed us, embodied us, is so that we can move into a community and make a difference there and work for its good. It's all over the scriptures. We're called to do this. Okay, and so that's actually a place where I think AI has become a bit of a danger zone, is that those who already have the temptation to say, I don't really want to work much, I'm going to see how much of this I can automate, is we'll just automate ourselves out of existence and try and coast. And that's not Sabbath rest. That's idleness, right? It doesn't lead to purpose. And it also doesn't work. This is interesting. We're going to look at a study really in depth in 2 weeks about how, so MIT did a study that shows how the frequent use, not even like obsessive amounts of use, but just using frequently, like a couple times a week or less, AI tools deteriorates your brain and your ability to think critically and to use logic and to connect pieces for yourself. It's terrifying. We're going to look at that in a few weeks when we talk about wisdom and knowledge and discernment. But another interesting part of the study that MIT did was that they surveyed a whole bunch of companies that had invested heavily in introducing AI into their businesses. And what they found was that 95% of those businesses said they saw little to no measurable return on investments. It didn't actually make that big of a difference, because what they automated, sure, that's great. And they saved a few bucks on employees that they replaced with AI, but the rest of their workforce was no longer able to function as well as they did, because it's deteriorating their brains. Because it's reducing our God-given ability to think critically and use wisdom and discernment, right? So not only are we not made to just automate everything so that we don't have to work, it doesn't actually work when we try, right? And so that's that's the thing that I want to land on right now about embracing our God-given limitations. We talked a lot about the whole, we are limited in our strength. We have to rest. We can't just go without ceasing. Nor can we just automate ourselves out of work. Work is good. We require it. But what I'm really concerned by is what it's doing to our brains. Because on the one hand, we are acting as if we are so wise because we have access to instant answers everywhere, all at once now. But what's actually happening is it's interrupting the development of our learning. I've talked to students and read studies where students were interviewed, university and high school, who said, what's the point in learning? I'm not focusing on learning anymore. I just got to know how to make AI get me good grades. That's it. But that's not how we're actually formed as wise, well-thinking humans made in the image of God. Because wisdom is about more than just having answers. It's about being formed into something. It's not instantaneous. It's a process, right? Even Jesus, God incarnate, when he came in the flesh, increased over time in wisdom and knowledge, right? It says in Luke chapter 2, and Jesus increased in wisdom, in stature, and in favor with God and with people. We are made to grow in a progressive process, a slow and natural process where we develop over time, especially in relationship with God and others. Not where we just look for quick answers, right? So how many of you have heard that humans, this was a study done several years ago now, humans have about the attention span of a goldfish, right? That number has decreased since then. I don't remember what it is, but goldfish have a better attention span than the average human now. What does that say about us as a species? But interestingly enough, the drop-off in human attention span started with the introduction of the smartphone and has outpaced in the last few years. Because now we don't even need to Google something and say, okay, give me 10 seconds and I will have the answer for you. We can say, okay, give me a second and ChatGPT will have the answer for you. I don't even have to check the sources, which you should. We're going to talk about that in a few weeks. It's often wrong. But we've replaced the desire to learn with the desire to just know. And that's this ancient human temptation. That is actually the basis of all occultic magic practices throughout all of history, is saying we want to know everything. We just want all of the answers to life in our hands now. But God designed us not to know everything, but to seek to learn and grow, right? I love what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. He says, look, we know that we all have knowledge, but knowledge puffs up. Love builds up. If anyone thinks he knows anything, he does not yet know it as he ought to know it. If anyone loves God, he is known by him. Knowledge for knowledge's sake is empty. It's actually meaningless, right? And yet we have so many people who all they want is the answer. I just want the quick, easy answer. And that's how young people are now being formed to think, is I just need the answer. I don't need to know how I get there. I don't need to understand. I don't need to learn and be formed in wisdom. I just need the answer. Right? But that's not real wisdom, right? Because wisdom is not achieved. Wisdom is formed. Real godly wisdom is formed through walking through situations, in reliance on God, in relationship with others, so that we learn, so that we grow as people, not just so that we have good answers all the time. And yet we're living in a culture where even the desire to learn and grow and be formed in wisdom is being replaced with the desire to just have a quick answer. And it's short-circuiting our God-given design to grow in wisdom and knowledge. It's not healthy. And we need to stop obsessing But I know so many people who feel foolish when they can't just figure out the answer to something quickly. Did you know it's actually okay for you to not know something and for you to ask other people and for you to learn from them in a way that will do far greater formational work in you than just Googling the answer? To pull someone up who knows something and say, I want to learn from you. It's why we do mentorship here. So we walk alongside someone and learn relationally because there's real value there. You're formed in a way that will actually bear lasting fruit. Right? Because we are meant to be wise creatures, but not to just have all the answers, right? So as we go into the rest of this series, I need us to recognize, okay, we're actually meant to be limited, but it's for our good. When we bump up against things where God says, this is the way I've designed you, we should embrace that as a gift. We should receive the limitations of God as a gift instead of trying to do it apart from him. Because here's the most beautiful thing about being limited, right? We can only actually achieve a fully human life when we live integrated and embodied, when we accept our limitations, when we accept that we are human, we're not God. We don't need to try to be. We don't need to work without ceasing because God does that. We can rest in him. We don't need to be everywhere at once because God is. I need to just be present where I am, with who I am present to. I don't need to know everything because I know the one who does. And I can trust him even when things are confusing, even when things are challenging, right? See, what that does is it shows us that life is actually best found when we embrace rather than fight our limitations, specifically because our limitations make God's power most visible. Our limitations show us that we need God. And they show those around us that actually God is the one at work. It's his power at work in us. This is what Paul says all over the place. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul writes, if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, sorry, I am reading the wrong passage there. Whoops. Yep, nope, here we go. Okay, the God of this age has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For we are not proclaiming ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord. And ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God who said, let light shine out of darkness, has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of God's glory in the face of Jesus Christ. So now we have this treasure in clay jars, so that this extraordinary power may be from God and not from us. See, the light of God shines most brightly when we acknowledge we are weak, we are limited. We can't do this stuff on our own. We are utterly dependent upon God. Then he is magnified. He is glorified, and we're not. He is lifted up. When we embrace our limitations instead of trying to overcome them, we can say, God is the one at work, not me. God is the one who is powerful, not me. I don't need to work like it's all up to me. I don't need to have every answer to every question, because I can rely on the one I know, the God who made me, the God who loves me. So that's why being limited is actually a beautiful gift, but it's one that's hard for us to embrace, right? So I'd encourage you to wrestle through that in prayer. Say, okay, God, where am I trying to push past this? Maybe you recognize you need to learn to rest. Maybe you recognize you need to learn to embrace the fact that you're designed to work hard. Maybe you need to recognize that you're not going to have all the answers, and that's okay. But wrestle through with God. Where are you trying to push past that limitation and instead embrace his gift, right? I'm going to invite the worship team and the communion servers to come forward, because in a moment we're going to respond to this the only way that's possible, by saying, God, I need you. God, I can't do this on my own. You actually designed me that way. We're going to do that by worshiping him and by coming to the table. And I love the table of Jesus as a reminder of God's unlimited power and our absolute need for him. Because Jesus said that he came so that we could have life. And this is how he did it. He gave himself for us because we could never actually fix that. Right? Ever since the garden, we've been buying into the lie that we can be our own God. And part of the way we do that is by trying to work hard enough to make ourselves right with him. And he says, you can't. You need me. I'll make the way for you. So as we come to the table, this is for everyone here who belongs to Jesus. If you have placed your faith in Christ, the table is for you. So as we worship, you're invited to come forward, take the bread and the cup, and bring that back to your seat with you. And then we will all take together. But if you're here and you have never said yes to Jesus, would you receive this as an invitation? If you're saying, look, I have tried to make myself good with God. I've tried to be good and righteous and just. I've tried to be loving and kind. I've tried to live the way God designed me for, and it's not working on my own. Would you embrace the fact that you can't do it on your own? Would you receive the gift of God, the grace of God, that Jesus actually gave himself for you? Because he says that the bread that we take, he said, this is my body broken for you. That he laid his life down so that you could come to relationship with God. That the cup is the blood of the new covenant, this relationship we have with God, not because of anything we do, but because of who he is. So if you are here and you've never said yes to Jesus, but you recognize, look, I need you, God. I can't do this on my own. Would you also come forward and receive? Would you take the bread and the cup and let that be your declaration to God that you belong to him, that you are turning to him, away from your sin and receiving that life from him? Practical instructions, and then we're going to pray and take the bread and the cup. Just come to the station in front of you as you're ready, and then bring it back to your seat, and then we'll all take together. If you need gluten-free, regardless of where you're seated, please come to the station and let us know you require the gluten-free bread, okay? Now, I'd invite you to stand if you're able, and we'll pray. Father God, thank you so much for your love. God, thank you that you love us. Thank you, Lord, that where we could do nothing on our own, you made a way for us. God, thank you that you don't look at us for what we do and what we produce, but you look at us because you love us. You call us your beloved because you made a way. God, that if we are in you, if we are in Christ, we are confident in your love. Jesus, would you help us to find rest in you today? To find life in you today? To embrace the limitations? To resist the lie that calls us to try and be our own gods? Lord, as we come to your table, would we be reminded the good news that you have done it? That it is not us. We love you, Lord. Would you just meet us here as we come to your table?